So it's now just about 4 o'clock. So I'm delighted to welcome Anna Dixon, Dr. Anna Dixon, the Chief Executive of the Centre for Aging Better, who's my guest this week. Hi, Anna. Thank you very much for joining me this week. Anna's had a wonderful career from being a researcher and academic to the Department of Health, the King's Fund, London School of Economics. So she knows more about health and health policy than probably anyone else I know. But she's now turning her hand to being Chief Exec of the Centre for Aging Better, and been there since, I think, September 2015, and has recently published her new book. You'll see it on the screen, The Age of Aging Better. And I think very importantly, it has a question mark at the end, which raises the question of, is this what's going to happen or not? Before I get into the interview proper, Anna, I noticed at the beginning of your book that you've dedicated it to your parents and grandparents. So as this is all about aging better, can you tell me a little bit about them and why you made that the dedication at the front of your book?
Well, I think in particular, my grandmother on my maternal side, Frida, she actually lived with us when I was a baby. She'd had a car accident in her mid-60s and was left disabled. And she went on to live into her 90s and lived a very good life, despite the fact that she was disabled and housebound. And I think there were a few factors in that. She moved into one of the brand new sheltered accommodation, which was designed to enable her to move around, and was a well-designed home. She kept in touch amazingly with friends and family. I think her phone bill that she ran up was enormous, and kept up a correspondence with people all over the world. And then I think, you know, finally she kept her mind active. She loved to play Scrabble, and yeah, she would always beat me. So yeah, I grew up with an inspiring grandmother, and my parents, you know, they're in their late 70s now, and I'd say they're aging pretty well as well.
No, that's lovely. So you're from real experience, you're now able to apply some of that in the book and in your work at the Centre for Aging Better. What I really liked about the definition of the Centre of Aging Better was that it says it's so that more people can enjoy later life. And I think that's a very common theme with Care Visions who put on this conversation that we have every week, because it's all about changing the mindset of how people see aging. Now, in your book, you highlighted one of the, I would say, is what you describe as a dystopian future at the beginning of the book. And I think it highlights some of the challenges that make your book title have a question mark at the end of the title. Let me just read an excerpt from that dystopian future. This isn't that far ahead. This, you say, is 2040, so it's only 20 years ahead. And you say, corporatization and the convenience of virtual shops and drone deliveries means the high streets and shopping malls are empty. Communities have become unsafe and green space is empty. Communities have become unsafe and green spaces are the no-go areas for people of all ages. Public transport has all but disappeared as fewer people travel to towns or shop or commute to work, as jobs have disappeared or changed, with more people working remotely at computers or in large out-of-town warehouses. People of different ages rarely mix. Fear and suspicion are rife between generations, fueled by negative social media campaigns and divisive political rhetoric. Obesity rates and high levels of depression have resulted in a reversal in life expectancy gains, and there are high levels of disability amongst older adults. Poor quality and poor designed housing built during the housing boom of the early 2020s means that more older people are housebound, and there are record deaths from heat exhaustion from the summer's extreme temperatures. There are more private renters living in poor quality housing, and landlords refuse to adapt properties to enable older people to live independently. Consequently, there are higher rates of hospital and care admissions. So that's a fairly depressing future as you've painted it. That's the start of the book. The book goes on to talk about the different aspects of what could be done to address that. Now, there's a load of chapters in there. I'm not going to try and cover everything in the next 20 or 30 minutes. So the three things I think we shouldn't try and talk about are work, pensions, and housing, because they're enormous subjects on their own. So let's leave out the chapters on housing, work and pensions. But let's focus particularly for the audience we've got this afternoon and the people who are joining us on what I can do myself to live better. And I suppose my starting point is just to ask you to say a little bit about the fact that you say in the book people quite often are living longer than they expect to. and that there's been an increase in life expectancy in recent years. Is that a really important issue to address, that people are living longer than they expect to?
Yeah, so I think it's critical that as part of making sure that we don't have that age of aging badly, but we have an age of aging better, is that we all wake up to the reality, which is facing us individually, it's facing our families, it's facing us as society, is that on average, we're living a lot longer, probably about 10 years, excuse me, longer than our parents' generation, and some 20 years longer than our grandparents' generation. So this is a huge, huge change. And combined with that, we need to remember that here in the UK, the baby boom, actually, as well as the spikes after the First and Second World War, was throughout the whole of the 60s. And so, you know, those people, that sort of bulge because of a high birth rate during the 1960s, are only going to sort of be entering this later life phase over the next 20 years. So that's why I'm arguing that it's just really, really critical that we recognise that we're living longer. I mean, it's a positive thing, hopefully, because it's more time on this earth. We often want more time. But the critical thing, and I think why I'm so delighted to be invited to speak to you, Jeremy, here, is that we must make sure that we live that longer life in good health. You know, there's no point having extra time if we spend longer in poor health or with disability and then not able to do the things that we want. So I think the beginning is, let's wake up both to our own life expectancy. So you can go on the ONS, and there's a little calculator I mentioned in the book that I plugged that in. So yes, many of us can expect that we won't die until we're 90. I mean, that's the reality. And if you look at, you know, children today, you know, 1 in 3 can expect to live to 100. So this is really a big shift in society.
And I think you point out in the book that it's changed very rapidly in recent years. I think since the year 2000, men are living on average 4 years more than they were, and women 3 years more. So just in the last 20 years, there's been a very dramatic change. Yes. But on the negative side, set against that, it seems to be one of the things that repeatedly come through your book is the challenge of ageism, and that we're tackling, as a society, we're tackling far more racism, sexism in recent years. We've seen these highlighted, but ageism still seems to be very strongly there. And one stark message that came up, one of the statistics in your book that stood out for me, is that a quarter of 18 to 24-year-olds think that it's normal to be unhappy and distressed and depressed, rather, when you're old. That it's not just something that happened, but actually it's normal. It's to be expected. And the language, you do a lovely bit talking about language changing from the way we describe young people. So we talk about a troublesome youngster's called a toddler with a degree of endurance. An old person's talked about an old fogey, and it seems to be in a negative language. So that underlying message of ageism, what can we do about tackling that societal view of older people?
Yeah, and it really does matter, Jeremy, that we have such a negative stereotype about later life and older people. The fact that it's so closely associated with disease, including dementia, with decline. And as a result of this, you know, not only do people experience ageism from others, you know, we do see in the media the sort of at the harmless end, young people sort of doing okay boomer, you know, maybe a bit of fun. But, you know, you also see journalists who've been writing, sadly, during this coronavirus, about a sort of cull of older people. So really pernicious views. And I mean, obviously, there are some very obvious reasons why it matters. But I think for us, it's about not seeing later life negatively, because actually that's our future selves. And if we're not looking forward to it, we're not going to take action today that can make it even better. And we internalize these views, you know, we repeat them ourselves in sort of everyday ageism I talk about in the book, you know, having a senior moment. And that leads to self-limiting behaviors. We actually stop being physically active because we think that we can't do things, or, you know, at the worst end of it, we might not even seek healthcare because we think that this is inevitable, that, well, we expect to be in pain at our age, or we expect to be unwell. So I think there are some serious consequences of ageism, of these negative stereotypes, and it's going to require us to call them out, to stop using them ourselves in everyday language, to make sure in the media, in the way things are reported, that the images that are used, that we have much more realistic images of the diversity of people in later life. So it needs addressing in a number of ways.
And do you think, you mentioned it a moment ago, do you think coronavirus has helped or hindered that understanding of older people and the challenges you face as you get older and the opportunities?
I think it's harmed significantly in the sense that the way that people over 70 at the very beginning were lumped together as all being vulnerable. And I mean, clearly the science is that age is a very sort of significant risk factor. But I think they're now talking about your COVID age, recognizing that actually we all age very differently, and therefore our risks are quite different depending on, of course, if we're from a Black or ethnic minority community, if we are poorer, if we are obese. So, but there was a tendency at the beginning just to say everybody's vulnerable, everybody's in need. And I think there was a sort of othering the way that language was used. And as I say, we did see some really negative examples, almost, and with care homes, the fact that the numbers were not even counted just shows how invisible people living in care homes are to us as a society. So I think we saw some really bad examples of ageism during COVID. Do I feel optimistic that there were some positives too? Obviously, I think it's shone a light on the desperate situation in our social care, and that we do need politicians to act and to properly fund and change that. But I think it's also shown that communities will come together, and so that's been a real positive. Helping one another, I hope that we will build on that and make sure that as we rebuild communities, that there will be more inclusive and people of all ages will be connected to one another.
And I think that's a good positive message that comes throughout your book, that all the way through the book you present challenges, but you also almost in the next paragraph say that there's an opportunity out of this challenge as well. And one of the things you point out in the book is that different societies have different attitudes to older people. And a lovely reference was the fact that in Japanese, I think you said there's no word for retire. That retirement as a concept isn't seen in the same way, where people sort of are seen to be beyond the pale or beyond activity. And one of my first guests on this program was Terry Waite, who I think you can tell me a little bit about how you know him. But Terry Waite, who talked about the fact that he's now 80 and he's just taken up playing the ukulele. And has feel that he's got a new challenge. He said he'll never get very good, but he's actually enjoying doing it. And I thought that was a lovely approach and attitude, and writing children's books that, again, he had never done before. But as I say, you I think had some contact with Terry Waite in the past.
Oh, well, that was very early on when I was at university. I was at Trinity Hall in Cambridge, and Terry Waite lived in the college for a short period as the guest of the college chaplain. And so I had the benefit of hearing firsthand some of his stories of obviously living in solitary confinement. So yes, I mean, he's had a very challenging life, so it's wonderful to hear that in his later life he's finding new things to learn, and that is one of the things that is encouraged in terms of giving us positive well-being in later life, is to learn new things. And certainly through pursuing interests and hobbies, it's a great way to connect with other people, particularly of different ages. And I think one of the things I talk about in the book is how society has become a bit age segregated. And so, there are clubs and centres that put on activities for older people. And in fact, they're not actually that appealing to most older people. And I think it's much more important that we create community spaces that are open and accessible to people of all ages, and that some of the activities in the community are around interests. I think I put the story of my mum, who got invited to join a book group with women who were 20 years her junior. and she's loved it, and they've continued to meet on Zoom, as most social activities have gone that way during the lockdown. But for her, that's just really positive to have girlfriends of a different generation, and sadly some of her contemporaries are now ill or more disabled. She's got that group of friends.
And there was a lovely quote. I'll just quote one sentence from your book that I think sums up what you said. You've got a sentence where it says, "Nobody wants to go to a club for lonely old people." And I thought that just about summed it up. We tend to stereotype and assume that old people want to go to a room full of other old people, and we get into that very stereotyped view of people sitting in a care home in Queen Anne chairs in a big circle, not talking to each other, with the television on too loud, which is not the reality of most care homes, but it's somehow perpetuated in the public eye that's what happens to old people. The importance of the community around you is you've just mentioned, and we've talked, and you give a lovely example. I think one thing you say is a chat to me badge, or it's a sort of badge that people can have saying happy to chat, I think happy it was. Happy to chat. But what kind of things can everyone do that makes a difference? You know, just you and me, not expecting the government to do it, not expecting somebody else to do it. What difference can people do to support their neighbours?
Well, I think we've seen it writ large during the pandemic, which is reach out to your neighbours. You know, if you don't know them, find out who they are. People do have mobile phones, many people of all ages, and you know, there are now WhatsApp groups that have been set up. People were outside their front doors doing the Thursday clap for carers, and people chatted and met each other for the first time. So there is something really about us all taking responsibility for getting to know those around us, and you know, building relationships with people in the places we live. And I think with many more younger people now working from home for more of the time, that's going to open, I think, up those opportunities to continue those relationships with people. And but there are also community activists who are looking to set up things like chatty cafes. So perhaps asking your, not at the moment, but asking a local cafe to set aside one table where people can go where they want to chat with other people, and you know, going out of your way perhaps to do that. Some have designated benches in the same way in parks or on streets, and I think it's these small changes that can open up and just prompt us perhaps to be brave to say hello and to have a chat. And those everyday contacts, whilst they don't fully address the problems that we see of loneliness and social isolation, those little everyday contacts can make a difference to people.
And is volunteering an important part of that, either by being a volunteer or benefiting from a volunteer? Because a lot of older people, I think about becoming a volunteer and then never get around to doing it, or feel a bit scared of doing it, don't feel ready for it. What's your message around volunteering as an opportunity?
Well, absolutely. Volunteering is great for us, those that do it. It gives us a lot of meaning and purpose, and particularly if we've been used to having a job and working, volunteering can provide us with some of that social connection and that structure to our week that we perhaps lose when we give up work. But my advice would be, don't wait till you retire to start. The evidence says that we make a habit of it. So it's also important that employers support people who've started volunteering perhaps during lockdown whilst they were furloughed, that as they return to work, they're also encouraged to carry on volunteering. And it's also making sure that the community and voluntary organisations help people when perhaps their circumstances change. So if you develop a health condition, that can make it more difficult to carry on volunteering. And so at the Centre for Ageing Better, and I've included these in the book, we've developed a set of age-friendly and inclusive volunteering sort of guidelines to make sure that those opportunities really do enable people to carry on volunteering. You know, perhaps bereavement is another reason why people's life circumstances change. Perhaps they did social things with their partner. And so there are some really great examples. We support a project in Oxfordshire where they're supporting recently bereaved people to have a go at volunteering and sort of build their confidence back and build new social connections through volunteering. So definitely good.
Great example. Yeah, thank you. One of the things that didn't seem to get mentioned much in your book, but I wanted to ask you about, which because I think it does seem important to a lot of people, is faith groups and faith communities. Do you have a feeling about how they can play a part in changing attitudes and engaging older people in a positive view of the future?
Yeah, so what we see is that people from poorer communities and BAME backgrounds are perhaps less likely to take some of these more formal volunteering roles that we might see. So, but where they do get involved in their community is often through their faith or cultural community. And I think that's really important that faith communities recognise that, and that they do play an important role in enabling people to contribute to their communities and for those intergenerational relationships between people. And obviously, again, as faith communities have had their buildings shut for quite a few months, I think there's also an opportunity for them to see themselves as an important community hub. Some have been involved in mobilising for community support. So I think, yeah, really important role in enabling people to carry on participating into later life.
Yeah, and I'm certainly pleased that my church next door to where I live has now reopened for socially distanced services, which seems to go well, including leaving the prayer book in the pew so that it can self-clean before the following Sunday. So that was a lovely touch. Moving to the individual and what any one person can do on their own, I think it was your colleague Louise Ansari who wrote a lovely book called When We're 64, Your Guide to a Great Later Life. And one of the things you point out from the Centre for Ageing Better website is that while people are living longer, the number of years lived in poor health with disability are increasing. But the message that I got from your book is that there's a lot that you can do to address that. And the two ones that stood out as so simple, and perhaps you could say more about muscle strength and balance, because both of those seem to be challenges that can quite easily be addressed, but can be enormously debilitating if you don't do anything about it.
Yeah, so absolutely. Health is really critical, and poor health is not inevitable. And I think it's really important that people understand that and don't assume that their illness or lack of ability is to do with their age. And actually, it can be changed. So one of the really important things about physical activity, I think we all know about heart health and doing sort of aerobic exercise. But one of the things that's been really ignored, and yet it's really, really critical, particularly as we get older, as you say, is about maintaining our muscle strength and balance, because otherwise there's a real risk of having a fall. And actually, it's quite common. About 1 in 3 over 65s will fall at least once in a year. And that can result in a hip fracture if your bone strength isn't as good. So we've been looking at the evidence and been advising the chief medical officers, and they recommend at least twice a week doing what's called resistance training. So that can be actual very light weights, hold up a couple of tins of beans at home, or with resistance bands. But it can also be things like racket sports, also impact training. So yes, sort of running, but dance. And then in terms of balance, things like Tai Chi or yoga can potentially help with balance. So there's a whole range of things that can help. And the aim is obviously to build up your muscles. If you don't, they decline at quite a rapid rate. And then, as I say, you're much more likely to have a fall.
Yeah, and I loved your examples when in the book where you talk about dance, and you give the point that it can be appropriate to the kind of dance you like. So I think you quote 2 examples. One is Silver Swans, run by the Royal Ballet, and one is Zumba Gold. So it doesn't matter which kind of activity you like, you can find some way of building it into your exercise to strengthen your muscles and feel more balanced and more positive. Can I ask one other thing, and then we'll come to a few questions come in, and I'll try and get 1 or 2 of them in. But the other aspect we haven't touched upon is mental health. And you quite alarmingly point out in the book that I think 85% of older people with depression or anxiety get no help from the NHS. That seems staggering. Is that really the case, that people just don't get the support they need from the NHS?
So I think there's a number of different issues here. I think it's being under presented. So I think there's stigma attached to it. And I sometimes wonder whether loneliness is an easier euphemism than saying that one is depressed. Then I think there is an issue about GP diagnosis. And again, there may be some ageism in that, oh, well, you're a bit sad and down, that's sort of inevitable, rather than seeing it as a treatable condition. And then when it is diagnosed, the treatments offered, usually in the case of older adults, are antidepressants. Very few are referred through for therapy. So I think there's a number of issues going on here, but the result is that there are many people at older ages who are experiencing low-level anxiety and depression that is being untreated.
So that's probably something that we should be focusing on, and making sure that there's more expectation from the NHS and GPs to tackle that in an effective way. Let me just ask you a couple of the questions that have come in, because we're going to run out of time. So let me just say, so the first one is from Sharon. This picks up on a point that we were talking about a few minutes ago. Sharon says, it's been great to see community support for the elderly during lockdown. Do you think we can carry this on in the future? What can be done to maintain it?
Well, I hope we will carry on, and I think we need to see it as what some of those are called mutual aid. It's about reciprocity. It's not just about helping needy older people. I think that sort of plays into that negative stereotype we're trying to tackle. What do I think is needed? Well, I think it does need better support from local authorities. Some of them have small grant programs and can help to nurture. I think some of the big funders need to do more to actually fund some of this more local, bottom-up, grassroots community organising. They have a tendency to prefer to fund more established and organised charities, but unfortunately that means money doesn't go into the communities who probably need it most. So I think there are things that can be done nationally to help nurture and support some of that community action to continue.
Great, thank you. And then the second question, very quickly, from Penny. I live in Manchester, which I recently found out is meant to be an age-friendly city. What does this mean, and is Manchester the only city to do it?
Oh, brilliant question. Thanks very much. Yes, City of Manchester. In fact, Greater Manchester whole of has declared itself to become an age-friendly city region. And there are now, I think, 40 local authorities around the country who are members of our UK network of age-friendly communities. And you can go on our website and find a map that will show you where they are. These are places that are committed to becoming age-friendly. It's part of an international movement supported by the World Health Organization. And it means looking at everything from housing, transport, to health services, from the point of view of involving older people and making sure that as the population ages, all of their services and policies in that area are suitable for and meeting the needs of older citizens.
Okay, thanks, Anna. I think we're more or less out of time. There's a question from Harry, which I won't read out because I think it's probably more a question for me, where he says many older people have now found that they can have excellent life and health and have discovered the secret of healthy longevity. Why aren't we learning more from them? I'll take that as a prompt that I should invite some of those people to be my guests on future episodes of this healthy aging conversation. But Anna, I'm going to stop there, and I just want to finish by thanking you very much for joining us. Encourage everyone to get a copy of the book and read it, because it's full of very practical information, as well as a manifesto for a call for action. But there are things that you can make and adopt to make a difference. It helps steer and support some of the things that Care Vision's Healthy Aging are doing with their video programs that are enabled to support people to live better through their own initiative. And just to finish, and to thank Anna in her own words, I'm going to read from the end of her book, where we went from the dystopian view of life in 2040. This is what Anna would like to see happening if we all put our weight behind the initiatives that she talks about in the book. So thank you, Anna. And just to finish, Older entrepreneurs have been encouraged to partner with younger entrepreneurs, combining technology know-how and experience with more startups succeeding than ever before. Small and medium-sized businesses are flourishing. The price of oil and climate change has driven consumers to seek out products and services from local suppliers and local markets, and town centres are thriving. A movement to create age-friendly communities means high streets are busy with people of all ages. A major investment in accessible and clean public transport means it's easy for people of all ages and abilities to get around. A major government initiative to focus on prevention and healthy ageing 20 years previously means more people are living longer in good health. Government regulations to reduce sugar and a major investment in communities to boost physical activity with active travel options, a network of public transport and green places where people of all ages can get out and about and keep active have reversed obesity trends. Very topical in light of the announcements the government's just made in the last couple of days. Yeah. So Anna, thank you very much. You've, I think, encouraged me to feel that there's a lot that anyone can do as an individual, but also a lot we can do as a society to make sure that we really do have an age of aging better. And it's great to end on that positive note so you finish on the book. Thank you, Anna. And next week, I'm delighted we'll be able to continue this theme when Baroness Sally Greengross, the Chief Exec of the International Longevity Centre, and of course, very active member of the House of Lords, who's been pushing forward the issues of older people for many, many years. Baroness Sally Greengross will be my guest next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. But until then, thank you for joining us, and thank you again to Anna.